Hello, everyone. It looks like we have a standing room only crowd here today, which is not at all surprising. I think many of you have heard Nawzad Othman speak before, and you know what a treat you're in for. I'm Maria Wolf, President of the Council, and I have a couple of announcements to make about upcoming programs that might be of interest to you. In fact, we have so many upcoming programs that I can only tell you about a few of them, or there would be no time at all for Nawzad. So beginning Wednesday this week, tomorrow actually, our young professionals are having a discussion group on the future of Korea. On Thursday, we're co-sponsoring with the Oregon Historical Society a talk on the Jewish resistance against the Nazis. You don't even have to make a reservation for that. It's free. It's in the first floor here of the Oregon Historical Society to go along with their World War II exhibit. Then we have another Young Professionals meeting next Wednesday. It will be an International Trivia Night, and you don't have to be either young or professional to go. And it might be a very good workout for you in preparation for the World Quest competition on November 20th, about which I will tell you more in a minute. Then on Thursday, September 17th, next week, we have one of our rapid response programs. You know how occasionally we will do things that are topical in the news that come up so quickly that they are not even in the print newsletter. But this one is on Greece and the immigration crisis. A local photojournalist, John Rudolph, has been on the island of Lesbos, where many Syrian, Afghan, and some Iraqi refugees are flooding onto this island, and has taken a lot of pictures. It'll be kind of a multimedia experience, so I hope you will join us. And I think it's certainly a sampling of what refugees are going through elsewhere. Did this just go off?
Yes.
Okay, Tim to the rescue. Okay, is this working?
No.
Shall I shout?
Yes.
Of course, the minute I start shouting, it will go on, and then there we go. Drive you right out of the room. Okay, so that's next Thursday, and then the following Tuesday, Steve Bass, who is known to many of you as that guy that's always asking you to cough up more money for Oregon Public Broadcasting. He's the CEO of OPB, a wonderful guy, also on our board of trustees. He went recently to Ukraine under a U.S. government-sponsored program to work with Ukrainian media. And honestly, he came back a transformed man. I ran into him in a hallway somewhere, and he said, "I never thought about the idea of the weaponization of information." So I think this will be a very good talk. It will be on noon right here, Tuesday, September 22nd. Then we have India on the Rise by Dr. Ishar Ahluwalia, who is one of India's foremost experts on urbanization and economic issues. So certainly India is an interesting place in so many ways, and we don't very often have someone of that level of expertise in Portland to talk about it. So I encourage you to attend that. Then, I am getting into the end of this. There will be time for Nawzad. Steve Levine, who has written a book called The Power and the Glory, Geopolitics and the Future of Energy. This is a presentation at 3 in the afternoon. It will be over at the World Trade Center auditorium on 2nd and Salmon. I think a very interesting topic, particularly as energy issues are really top of mind for those of us in the Northwest as well. So I certainly encourage, he's such an interesting guy. He ran the bureau for the Wall Street Journal in the Soviet Union, Pakistan, and the Philippines for many, many years, 18 years, and comes at this from not only a journalist's standpoint, but also somebody who knows a lot about energy issues. Then, two more things. On November 4th, we have Robert Reich, the former Labor Secretary and everybody's favorite liberal gadfly. We have that scheduled right now at the Old Church, which is not a very big space. So given the fact that we already have a lot of registrations, we may want to rethink the location. But in any case, put on your calendar November 4th. Last but certainly not least, you may have noticed from your newsletter that this is the year of Cuba at the World Affairs Council. We're doing all kinds of things to Cuba, including 2 trips, one in January and one in March, but also lots of other kind of lead-up things. There's a play by Artist Repertory Theater called Cuba Libre that we're co-sponsoring, and before each play, we're going to have a little presentation on some aspect of Cuban life and culture, so that should be terribly interesting. Then the big thing here is the World Quest competition, which this year the theme is A Night in Old Havana. So there will be mojitos, there will be great music. I'm not so sure about the cigars, although I've been told that they've recently become legal. But this is a fundraiser for our K-12 education program, and it's great fun every year. You gather your 8-person trivia team and you go to town. If you don't know anything, that's fine too, because there'll be plenty of mojitos. Nawzad Othman is the chair of the World Affairs Council of Oregon. His most important job, but he's also had a few others that I'd like to tell you about. He was born in Erbil into a Kurdish family with rich connections to the history and evolution of Kurdistan. He emigrated to the US when he was 18 years old, earned his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from South Dakota State University, and his Master's in Urban and Regional Studies from, is it Mankato State University? Mankato, okay. Yeah. Nawzad worked as a transportation engineer, bridge and airport design engineer in the Midwest and Oregon, and also served as Director of Public Works and Planning for the city of Lake Oswego. In 1981, he co-founded Otak, which went on to become one of Oregon's largest and most respected architecture and engineering companies, with over 300 employees in Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Colorado, Abu Dhabi, and the United Arab Emirates. He was CEO of the company for 30 years until his retirement in 2012. Under Nawzad's leadership, the firm developed a reputation for excellence in smart growth planning, sustainable design, and innovative transportation solutions. In 1912, Nawzad created the Othman Group to assist clients in the Pacific Northwest and the Middle East with business strategies, investment opportunities, and sustainable practices. The firm's associates work from offices in Portland, Iraq, and Abu Dhabi, as well as the United Arab Emirates. It's clear that he does not understand the meaning of the word retirement. Nawzad maintains deep contacts in Kurdistan, where he owns agricultural land, and he's certainly interested in Iraq as a whole. There, his family members have been local and national leaders and continue to make significant contributions to the country's progress. His father, Ahmad Othman, was the first governor of Erbil after independence, and his portrait continues to hang today in the sarai of the president-governor. His father was also the first Kurd to become a senator in Baghdad in 1929. I think we can say quite positively that Nawzad is also the first Kurd to serve as chair of the World Affairs Council Board of Trustees. Please join me in welcoming the wonderful Nawzad Othman.
First, I hope you all had a wonderful Labor Day weekend. I can guarantee you we'll have somewhat good weather, at least for the next week. I started writing some notes about this presentation a few weeks ago, and I have to tell you, I shredded more paper and threw away more of my notes. As late as this morning, my dear friend Tim sends me more news about what's happening, and I say, oh my God, I can't say this, I'm going to throw it out. So it tells you the evolving and fluid change, what's going on in the Middle East. I think the words that come to mind right now is things like agony, desperation, anger, tragedy. We all have watched the television news and reading the news this last week about the refugees from Syria mostly going to Europe, going to Germany. It's opened their doors to them, one of the few countries. And many of them stuck in the train station in Budapest and Hungary. And parents are hugging their children, desperately hanging on, not letting go. It's very tragic. And this year alone, over 300,000 refugees from the region, mostly from Syria, have gone to Europe. But probably no image has captured all of us, the world actually, and the whole tragedy, as the image of the 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi, who was from Kobani, Syria. was dead body, came ashore in Turkey. And it was, when you look at, in fact, even the Turkish soldier who was carrying him was avoiding looking at him. I mean, the thing was so powerful, and you could tell that that his mother had dressed him in his best clothes, and he had his best shoes on, taking him on a journey to Europe, a journey to freedom, a journey to a new life. Of course, the boat capsized with the family, and most of them died except for the father, Abdullah. And there was a journalist, I think from Washington Post, that's something I'll try to paraphrase, and he says, there is that 3-year-old Aylan that died on the shore in Turkey, left a home that didn't want him, going to a land that will not accept him, and died in an area that most probably will not want him there either. So that tells you the story. MENA, which is more Middle East and North Africa, it's a region of 450 million people. It's a region, and many of you have traveled, have gone in different parts from Morocco to Turkey, Istanbul, to Israel, to Damascus, to Cairo, to the Emirates. It's rich in history. It's the birthplace of the world's 3 great religions. But that region today is on fire. That region today is going through turmoil, it's going through agony, it's going through extremism, and it's literally troubled region. In fact, when you see the numbers of the refugees, there hasn't been this kind of a calamity since the Second World War. And for the region itself, there has not been this kind of turmoil since the First World War, when the Brits and the French, the conquering allies, established the boundaries of modern Middle East from the Ottoman Empire that was defeated, without regard to the demographics of ethnicity and religion. So we have a country we have a region in turmoil, and the issues really are complex. They are unpredictable. They are overwhelming. And if we're not careful, it really is dangerous, and we've already have seen that happening moving forward. Let me give you a start. I mean, you all know what's happened. In 2011 was the Arab Spring, was the Arab Revolt. And it started out in Tunis and Tunisia with the young fruit vendor who was completely fed up with the brutalization and authoritarianism of the police and the country, set himself on fire, and that became the immediate catalyst for the uprising in Tunis. And in the spark, right away, affected, the same thing happened in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, in Yemen, and in Bahrain. It was driven by the passion to change things. It was driven by being fed up with dictatorships that's been going on for so long, by the anemic economic growth, by the disparity between the very rich and the very poor. And it was really a cry for justice. It was a cry for freedom. But now what's happened when you see after that initial euphoria that was really driven by the young through social media, there was high expectations for change, for positive change. Unfortunately, there was no institutional sense of replacement to the 30, 40 years of authoritarianism. Unfortunately, so what happened, you had failed states in most all except one case. Libya right now is a failed state. It's anarchy. And after the killing of Gaddafi, you have 2 parties, one elected and one Islamist in Benghazi, and there's no end in sight. Egypt replaced one dictator Hosni Mubarak after 30 years of rule, with the Islamic Brotherhood who were elected, but then within a short period of time they were overthrown by another military coup, another dictator, General al-Sisi. And to many, they believe that his rule has been probably as authoritarian and as been disregarding the human rights and especially the free press as predecessor. And then in Bahrain, a country that's a majority Shia, they rose against, demonstrated against the ruling emirs to be brutally attacked and with help from Saudi Arabia. So that whole area has subsided. In Yemen, a very poor country, one of the poorest countries in the region, but one of the oldest historically, and is very strategically located. They too, and you remember the pictures of the young men and women vying for that liberation, and that they got rid of the dictator, and they elected a new leader to again succumb into civil war between the groups, the Houthis, who are a branch of Shia, and the Sunni majority, and the strong presence of Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula. And then the country, in fact, the United Nations estimates that the tragedy of Yemen, it's a human catastrophe in the making, and we have to really be careful where that's going. So, I mean, this is the story that's been happening, and I'll talk to Syria in a minute. But the thing that when you talk to people, you realize the passions, the aspirations, and the drive for the people that had revolted in the Arab Spring is not dead. In fact, is alive, probably stronger than ever. But what has happened, that has been tempered by the need for stability. Because what has resulted in these revolutions was chaos. So, and how do you balance stability against chaos, liberation against security? Very tricky question, but they're very aware. So the people you talk to, they talk about evolution, not revolution. Then we get into probably the most tragic, where things are really burning the hottest, and that is Syria, Iraq, and the rise of ISIS from the ashes of the chaos of the two countries. And what is really tragic is both Syria and Iraq are probably at some point, they were one of the most advanced, most civilized. They have a huge history. At its birth is the Mesopotamia of the old, is the ancient civilizations. It is the Sumerians, the Babylonians, it's the Assyrians, it is the zenith and the height of the Arabic empires and the Umayyads and the Abbasiyin and the Islamic culture. And they were a very diverse society. They had a very large Christian community, very large Jewish community. In fact, there are still some villages in Syria and Iraq that still speak Aramaic. Those two countries now are completely broken. They will not be back the way they were again. No matter what is said, and that is the reality. And that is really unfortunate. Now take Syria first. In 2011, it's part of the Arab Spring. In the city of Homs is where it started. 2011, the city of Homs, Syrians demonstrated, and initially it was peaceful demonstration against the rule of Bashar al-Assad, who he and his father have been ruling with an iron fist in Syria for the last 30, 40 years. The government attacked them with unbelievable brutal force. And they were really demanding reform, demanding economic revitalization, and that force against the citizens of Homs spread. spread throughout the country, spread unbelievably in a very short time. And then the attacks get more severe, and then you had the barrel bombs, the cluster bombs, and everything they can do against those cities. And some of those cities, like Aleppo or Damascus, are ancient cities, and they've always been part of the history of the Arab culture. And then so the United Nations, I mean not the United Nations, many of the countries in the region and Europe and the United States were trying to get it to a solution. Nothing has happened. Partly because Russia and Iran were supporting Syria, and with the Security Council, so nothing would go anywhere. But in the middle of this crisis with Syria is the extremism came to life. The al-Nusra group, the al-Qaeda group, and then more prominently ISIS came to power. And initially, those groups were supported by Saudi Arabia, by Turkey, and by some of the other Arab states, on the assumption that they are fighting against Bashar al-Assad. But the reality is they've created a monster that unless checked, they can devour them all. And then that's the really unfortunate part. But what's happened in Syria today, the Human Watch and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimated over 250,000 Syrians have been killed. Between 11 and 12 million refugees and IDPs. IDPs is internally displaced persons. In the region, 4 million Syrians have had refuge in the neighboring countries. There's 1.9 million in Turkey, about 1.2 million in Lebanon. Lebanon, a small country that can barely survive itself. About over 600,000 in Jordan. And Jordan has already had the hits about the Iraqi refugees. About 400,000 in Iraq and some in others. The impact on the region, the destabilizing region, has been massive. And what makes it even uniquely worse is that the United Nations are out of funds to fund those refugee camps in those areas. And in fact, the latest report, even food has been very scarce because of the money and the funding. So imagine a country, and this is Syria, about 24 million. Half of the country are either been killed or refugees. And if you take that as if you apply that to even our own country, that equates to about 160 million people. It's a country that's have been completely destroyed. Now, at the same time, where everybody is so fed up, the refugee crisis going to Europe. This year alone, like I said, 300,000 to Europe. And then they expect over 800,000 coming up. And then to compound that issue of the refugees in Europe, now the Iraqis they had a first wave of refugees. Now they're beginning to do the same thing, is trying to leave the country. So, and then Europe itself is dealing with its own economic issues, is dealing with its own immigration issues. Europeans have always been liberal to refugees, especially Scandinavian countries and others. And now we see that Angela Merkel has stood up and says, we're going to take him in spite of some of the pushback from Hungary and some of the Eastern European countries. So that's going to be a crisis. It will continue to be that way. Now we come to Iraq. Iraq is where it all started. And it really, when you think about it, it started in 2003 in our invasion and our occupation of Iraq. There are many, looking back, they say that our invasion of Iraq is probably one of the worst foreign policy blunders in American history. Nevertheless, there were many Iraqis, and it's really true, many Iraqis supported the invasion because it liberated them from this incredible tyranny of Saddam Hussein. But very quickly, the supporters inside the country and outside the country became detractors because of the incredible mismanagement and mistakes that we made. We quickly disbanded the Iraqi army, 500,000 strong, on the assumption that they were the army under Saddam. But the reality, there's 500,000 coming from all walks of life. They go home with no money, no jobs, except for one thing, their guns, their weapons. And that became, in many ways, the seed of insurgency. And the other thing they did was the de-Ba'athification. Anybody had anything to do with the party who was dismissed from government agency. So what that did, it left the bureaucratic system in the government, in the Ministry of Power, Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Public Works, without governance, without people running it. So that became the chaos. So Iraq went into a deep hole of insurgency. Lawlessness rampant, and even though we had 150,000 troops on the ground, there was no way we can take care of this country. And then you had the Sunni and the Shia uprising, where the Sunni used to be the majority, and now they were the minority, so they fighting against the Sunni majority today. And the only group that was left alone were the Kurds. The Kurds up north used that opportunity and created a really economic boom. But Iraq was burning. Iraq was in turmoil from 2003 to 2006, 2007. The respite came during the surge with General Petraeus, who set up, with the surge, reached out to the Sunni tribes to get them on board, and they did. So for a while, there was that element of stability. But it's really hard to tell how long that would last and how long that would be. But the other thing that happened in Iraq, the new Prime Minister, Maliki, that was elected in 2006 with our support and the Iranian support, and the Iranians by then really had the major influence in Iraq. But soon was discovered he was extremely sectarian, extremely authoritarian. He was re-elected again in 2010, even though he did not have the majority, but the others could not form the government. We supported it again in the US, against the advice of many of our own senior advisors. And by 2011, when we removed all of our troops from Iraq, Iraq went into the deep freeze of sectarianism, authoritarianism, and unbelievable corruption. Alienated the Sunnis and alienated the Kurds. So then the insurgency that briefly in 2006 went underground, but they went to Syria. And they came right back alive at 2011 when all the alienated Sunnis in Iraq, and then Syria was falling apart. And that was the birth of ISIS. And then 2014, it was Daesh, ISIS, ISIL, you name it, called themselves the Islamic State, came to power. First, their capital in Raqqa, Syria. In a very short time, they occupied a third of Syria and moved very quickly into Iraq and occupied about a third of Iraq, the Anbar western region. City of Mosul was a city of about 2 million. And here is the tragedy. With 1,000 men, those people take over the city that at the time supposedly had 35,000 Iraqi army in it. An army we supposedly had trained and spent billions of dollars training them. The army abandoned the city with all the equipment, and now they're still there. So that has been so now we have two failed states, and we have an extreme group. And then when you look at the group, what they have done and the images, I mean, obviously the horrible images of the call them the men in black beheading people. You see the horrible images of all the cities being destroyed, the historic monuments, the ones in the World Heritage classification, both in Syria and Iraq and Elmira and in Nineveh being destroyed. And you can't but cringe in horror and disbelief and anger when you see the interview of a young Yazidi woman talk about the thousands of women enslaved and sold by the men in black. Now we have decided that we need to go back and do something, because you cannot allow it to just become a real catastrophe. So we did. A year ago in June, we declared that we will contain and degrade ISIS. Today, a year later, they're still there. They still control most of those areas. In the last 5 years, when Syria is burning and the world is still trying to figure out what to do, how to fix it. Iraq has broken, and we're trying to put it together, but it's broken so badly that this rich country with all its assets through corruption is bankrupt. And you still have the issues between the Sunni and the Shia and the Kurds. So this is where we are. And our fight to degrade and our fight to destroy ISIS has been, we will provide all the air power, we will provide all the training, we'll provide the advisors, but we will not provide the boots on the ground, which is the right course, because it's a quagmire, and you get right back into it. And the boots on the ground have to be from the regional powers and the local peoples. And fortunately, the powers who can do this have not been able. Turkey hasn't. Saudi Arabia hasn't. Iran has been supposedly our detractor to some degree. The Iraqi army has been totally ineffective. The Free Syrian army, who had a chance and have a chance to be effective, they have hardly been trained. The only effective training that has happened has been done by Jordan, actually, and getting some of the training done for them, but nothing else. But the only groups that have been effective in the fight against ISIS have been the Kurds of Syria and the Kurds of Iraq. And it's partly because they were fighting for their land. They were not fighting for some ideology or some religion notion. The 5.5 million Kurds of Iraq and the 2.5 million Kurds of Syria have been formidable. In fact, they have taken back all the territories that ISIS have taken from that area. But unfortunately for them, they were thwarted and every step of the way. Their Iraqi Kurds are part of the Iraqi government. 2014, the Iraqi government cut off their budget completely. They wouldn't pay them. And arguments about oil and or exploration. And then not only that, but they had convinced us not to arm the Kurds directly, on the fear that the Kurds may become too powerful, they be wanting their own autonomy. And the same thing happened in Syria. The Syrian Kurds have been absolutely formidable. The Battle of Kobani, and some of you have seen, that went for months. The Syrian women Kurds who have been fighting, their imagery of what they have done has never been done in the Middle East. But they again have been, every step of the way, compromised and blocked by Turkey, who are very paranoid, very afraid about the Kurdish rise for independence. And for some of you, they may not know, the Kurds in the four countries of Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran, about 35 million people. 35 million people without a country. And for the last 100 years, they've been really vying for their rights, vying for autonomy. And the largest of the groups are in Turkey. Close to 18 million are in Turkey. So you have this whole piece about the dynamics and the flow and who is doing what. But at the end, we have to really realize that we cannot do this alone. We cannot do even many parts of it alone, because there's so much ingrained. There's so much of a challenge. The regional powers have to be part of our play, part of our partners. And those powers are Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Israel. Turkey is a very interesting place. Now, some of you have been there. I love going to Turkey. People love to go to Istanbul, love to go to all. It's a dynamic place. It has been a secular country, and it is very diverse. The current President Erdogan, when he was prime minister 13 years ago, he came from an Islamic party. Many Turks and many friends of mine were very concerned about that will be a threat to the deep roots of Turkey, which is secular. But they were really pleasantly surprised, because what Erdogan did, he completely changed the economy, became one of the most dynamic, fastest growing economies in the world. He curbed the power of the military. He reached out to the neighbors, and he started a peace process with the Kurdish insurgency that was led by the PKK. And that's something that was unheard of. So that group have been fighting Turkey for the last 20 years with about 40, 50,000 dead. And they also became the Iraqi Kurds' #1 trading partner, having a 50-year agreement to sell their oil. But something changed, especially in the last few years. Something changed where people believe that Erdogan has really become too obsessed with power. And the election last June, where he was wanting the majority rule, he didn't get it. Instead of getting the 60% that he thought, he only received about 43%. And interestingly enough, the Kurdish party, with association with the secular groups and the women, got 13% of the vote. It's unheard of in Turkey. So now many people feel that Turkey's working with the United States against ISIS is just a ruse to get the national group back up, so that in November election he will get that he brought up that will change the dynamics for him. And what he did, instead of attacking ISIS, the immediate bombing was the Kurds. He bombed the Kurds, the PKK, and they were all in northern Iraq. That's where we are with Turkey. Where that would lead, it's hard to say. But the reality is he may be really surprised in November, because the Turks are probably the people that most Islamic countries look to, as they have been able to blend Islam with modernity better than any of the others. Now we go to Iran. Iran right now, as you all know, is on the front pages of and the Iran deal. It looks like it may become real. But Iran, since 1979, have been vehemently anti-American. We've had all kinds of issues with them. But Iran is a huge country. And of all the countries, Iran has been an intact country for 3,000 years. It's part of the Persian Empire. It's a very educated class. In fact, in Iran, from what I understand, there are more women enrolled in universities than men. And they are really, and the majority of the Iranians are very young, and they are vying for change themselves. They don't want the system the way it is. Now it appears we have at least a moderate group that wants to make some changes, but it is opposed by very strong hardliners. The deal is with the United States, a nuclear deal, is the hope that that would moderate the impact that Iran has on the region. And remember, Iran has a tremendous amount of influence in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and you cannot ignore it. They're going to have to be part of the play. They're going to have to be part of the process of getting that fixed. And in fact, one of the things that's happened is the foreign minister of Iran is already planning to go to Saudi Arabia to have a rapprochement, at least a venue, to to get a process that puts away the Sunni-Shia divides going on. Then we have Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the largest producer of oil in the world, have been an ally for years. But Saudi Arabia is a very extremist country. It is actually dominated by the Wahhabi branch of Islam. And in fact, many people believe that a lot of the support that came out early on with the extremists, with the Al-Qaeda and even ISIS, came out of Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia also has an emerging, educated class of young men and women that are vying for change. So it is a vulnerable country, and it is a country that we have to watch where it's going to go and how it's going to go there. Egypt has always been the most populous and had been the most dominant Arab country. But right now, Egypt is in a quandary. Egypt's economy is in shambles, tremendous disparity between rich and poor. And with General Sisi, what direction is he going to go if he's not going to go to reform? That fire burning inside amongst the Egyptians who have a very educated class and a very high birth rate could be very damaging, could be serious. And then finally, our strongest ally, Israel, right now. Israel and the United States have always been very strong allies, but this last year, there has been probably the biggest, Israel has been our biggest critic in terms of our relationship, our agreement, nuclear agreement with Iran. And it has really created the largest rift since the founding of Israel between those two countries. And Israel has become isolated from many areas. And they see the Iranian deal as existential, as a real threat to them. But I really believe when you talk to people in the Middle East, I've really never heard of anyone that said that they want to have the Israeli-Palestinian issue resolved. And they want Israel to become part of the Middle East, not part of Europe. And I think they will find it to be very open. So the options really are very clear. We have to help move the process forward for a two-state solution, the Israelis and Palestinians. The alternatives are A, stay as it is. If you stay as it is, it's apartheid. You have half the country population that cannot vote. And if you allow that all the Palestinians become part of Israel, which some people advocate, which is fine, but that will change the character of the liberal Jewish state because of the demographics of the Palestinian. So the two-state solution is really necessary for the two. But Israel is a very important player and a very key player. So now, where do we go? Where do we go from here? Is there hope? Is there optimism? For me, I'm being optimistic by nature. Hopefully, I think there are some dynamics going on. Number one, even though everything is on fire, but there are still other areas that are not. Look at the monarchies of Jordan and Morocco. The Gulf, the GCC are vulnerable, but it's working. It's stable. And there are many of the people in the Middle East work over there. But the things that gives me more hope is that the nature, number one, is the human nature and the educated class in that region, which is very, very high, are vying for the same principles of the Arab Spring. That's not going away. But they're impatient, but they want to change it in a good process. I have many friends. Some tell me, Nawzad, you're dreaming. The place is on fire, there's no hope. And some really believe that. Some believe that this is going to take a long time, and it requires a cultural shift how the people themselves see their leaders. Not being to the absolute strong man, but a whole new democratic process. And there are many who are very capable, I just have no clue, or blame the West, or blame the United States, or blame Europe, and so forth. Secondly, is what's happening in the region, especially with the rise of ISIS and the refugees and the chaos. There is coming together some common emerging interests among people who ordinarily were enemies. Like if one person one time being interviewed, I think it was Shimon Peres, president of Israel, was being interviewed by, I think, Fareed Zakaria. And he said, what is it? Why is it this thing is not working in Israel? What's going on? And he said, it's a complete breakdown of trust. And when you think about it, the trust between the Israelis and Palestinians, the trust between the Shia and the Sunni, the trust between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the trust between the Turkish government and their Kurdish population, the trust of the people with their governments. That's really true. But those converging interests, that chaos, is making people now aware that they have to work together. So that's a plus. The third piece is internationally. The impact of this massive refugees and the dangers of what may happen if we don't contain it. They have to do something, not just driven by common interests, not just driven by their economics. It has to be driven by doing the right thing, and ultimately the moral thing. So this, in my opinion, the three things that to kind of capsulize it into what needs to happen. It's personal security, stability, economic security and development. The personal security is people live in their homes, live in their countries without fear. Economic security, they have jobs. They have the right jobs to take care of their families, to take care of their children, to send them to school. And third is governance. Governance is about good government, honest government. It's about the free press. It's about the independent judiciary. All three have to work together, but the very first two is immediate. It's right now. The governance is going to take generations. It's going to take 10, 15 years. It's going to take a long time. So we in the international community, we in the United States, what can we do? What should we do? What should be the priorities? I think number one is to get right on top of the refugee issue. First and foremost, fund it. Fund those camps. Make sure they are, at least that eases some of the impact. The refugees, make sure that the refugees are really landed in the right place. We have to open up. There's no other alternative, and no matter where that area is. But the ultimate solution for the refugees is to get back to their own homes. And that is going to take fixing the issues of the Iraq, Syria, especially to start with. Second is get the agreement with Iran going and get Iran engaged immediately with the GCC, with Saudi Arabia, with others to move quickly on Syria and Iraq. Both countries need to become confederate countries where the three regions of the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds are part of the country, but they're autonomous. There's no other solution. Fourth, we move quickly to work with Israel and the Palestinians to move forward to an honorable, honest, both sides win, two-state solution. We can go on for years, and that will still become problematic if we don't. The issue of governance, and then for us, the United States, we're the world's biggest military power. But we all understand there are limits to this power. And we all understand that all solutions are not through the military. Even the military tell you that. We're the world's largest, strongest economic power. And we have to wisely use economic power for the right direction. But more than that, what has been our key power has been the power of our values and the power of our principles. We cannot ignore it. But now we're facing this conflicting issues between values, pushing the values, at the same time stability. But we have to find a way. Over the years of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we probably supported every dictator around as long as they were anti-communist. We can't afford to do that anymore because the people demand something different. It's aspirational. And how we do it wisely, how we do it in the process, it will require tremendous wisdom and it will require tremendous leadership. The region needs to have leaders growing in the region, and we need to make sure that we have the courage and we have the patience and we have the understanding to help it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been very good. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, yes, ma'am.
Yes. You have mentioned several countries and ISIS. I want to know who is supplying the arms for ISIS. Where are they buying the arms from? They don't make them themselves. We know that America is supplying a lot of arms on one side. Who is supplying the arms on the other side? You have not touched on that.
Well, I think Daesh or ISIS, unfortunately, and most of their arms they captured from the Iraqi army.
Not all of them.
Not all of them, some of them. No, some of them. And some of them, they did the same thing with the Syrian army.
Yes.
And then also, those guys, through kidnapping and ransom, and they've taken some oil fields, had a lot of money, and they were buying arms through the black market.
That's what I wanted to get to.
The black market.
The
Now,
black market, who is supplying? Where
well,
is
some of that's
arms
coming,
from?
who knows, but some of that could be coming from Turkey, could be coming from Iraq, could be coming from Syria itself. So part of what I understand the US government is doing is trying to cut off that, at least that side of it, the money side. And there's money still, unfortunately, coming in from some parts of the Arab world.
Well, it seems to me the best thing to do would be to work on cutting off that supply of arms.
That's absolutely right. Supply of arm and supply of money, too. In my own mind, ISIS or Daesh is defeatable. There's no question it's defeatable, but you have to have the right partnership to defeat them. Susan.
Hi, Nawzad. I'd like to address the side of hope, and that is, you said that we need to really look at funding the refugee camps that exist now in the region. So do you have any ideas on how to do that? Maybe crowdfunding as well as getting the U.S. government and other first world powers to step up and take their part, like Angela Merkel is doing with the refugees in Europe?
Yeah, I think one thing, right now the donors for these camps is the United States is the biggest donor.
Okay.
We really have been, but others haven't. So the very first thing is through the United Nations, High Commissioner for Refugees, and that's where my understanding where a lot of that money is needed to. They're directing it, they're helping it. And the second, there are a lot of NGOs. They're out there trying to help the refugees. So check out. I think our own Mercy Corps has had a great significance. But countries in there, and then the Gulf Arab countries have to step up more. And this is where the pressure has to come in. Get the refugee camps funded and funded very, very well. Now, that doesn't solve the problem, but I think it reduces the impact a bit. Yes?
It's easy to see the connection between the invasion of Iraq by America in 2003, its effect on Iraq. How much of an effect did that invasion have on the breakup of Syria and so much more in the Middle East? And did it have any effect on the Arab Spring, for example?
That's a really good question. The question is, did invasion in Iraq, did it have an effect? Did it have a direct effect on on Syria and the Arab Spring? I really don't know. Though it's really hard to say. The Arab Spring, that volcano ready to erupt, may have had erupted whether we invaded Iraq or not, because it's been there for all those years. We did not create ISIS. Even with the invasion of Iraq, we did not create ISIS. We've created a condition, a catalyst, where these things happen with a combination of many other things. Syria was not because of our invasion of Iraq. Syria was part of the whole Arab Spring, the 6 countries that almost simultaneously erupted. But our mistake was the way we managed the occupation, especially in the early years. I hope that answers. Yes, sir.
And can you speak a little about the role of religion in conflict or making peace?
Well, I mean, people look at religion as being, the Shia, Sunni. In fact, you hear a lot that says, well, this has been going on for thousands of years and so forth. But when I go back and forth in the Middle East, like in the northern Iraq and in the Kurdish area, you have refugees coming in, and the refugees are Sunnis, they're Shias, they're Arabs, they're Kurds, they're Turkomans. And you go to any parts of the Middle East and you see people working together. So what happens, I think people kind of go back to when they're running against what's going on, especially in the economy. I think my sense of it is the economic conditions and the poverty and the brutalization that has taken place over the last 56 years has created this Sunna-Shia dichotomy. But it can be fixed. I'm absolutely convinced it can be. Because I've seen it. I've seen so many friends are Sunna, so many friends are Shia, and that issue never seems to come up as being ideologically or religiously driven. I think if you focus on the economy and the security and the jobs and bring the people, especially the antagonists, Iran and Saudi Arabia, have the rapprochement that's necessary, it will over time. It will over time change things. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I question our leadership. I thought there was a red line that Obama had drawn in Syria, and we were supposed to do something about it. And look back at why Reagan did not do something when over 250 Marines were annihilated in Lebanon. This has been a lack of leadership. And look at Libya. After Benghazi, we certainly should have interfered. I think we've been lax in our role, frankly.
I think the question is, have we been lax in our role of looking at what's happened in the Red Line in Syria that we advocated, and the Marine barracks, 200 some that were killed in Lebanon and the Reagan administration, and Benghazi? It's really hard to say. Sometimes we as a country are also driven by our own self-interests, and sometimes when we hope we can get our own self-interest, our own values in check, so they are the same. The one thing that you hear a lot, the criticism about the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, and you also hear that you don't need to be an aggressive power, but at the same time, you don't need to be a tentative power. So that part of the criticism of the current administration is they have been tentative in the way they dealt with Syria and the way they dealt with withdrawal of the troops in Iraq. These are all hindsights, and right now we're getting into a political campaign. You're going to see finger pointing all the time. And if there's nothing else, we somehow, this is such an important piece of what's going on in the world. We have to come together as a country to address those issues. They're complex, they're tough, and they're dangerous. Yes, ma'am.
Could you briefly address the Kurdish party in Turkey? We hear so much criticism of them, and I'd like to know.
Well, the Kurdish party in Turkey it's interesting. You're talking about the PKK or the new party? Yeah, the PKK has been what's called the Workers' Labour's Party. In fact, the old days was the Socialist Party. Maybe some have some communist left-wing party, and they have been the kind of front end fighting Turkey for Kurdish rights. But they've also antagonized many other Kurds. They've antagonized the Kurds in Iraq. They have worked closely with the Kurds in Syria, but many believe that they have gone too far. They may have been too violent. But at the same time, for over the years, Turkey never recognized Kurdish rights. So there was a lot of hope when Erdogan, a few years ago, started peace process negotiating with the PKK, and then abruptly ended it and started bombing them, and many of them are in Iraq. Many Kurds in Iraq and many Kurds in Turkey actually have read some editorials telling the PKK to cool it, calm down, we're moving in the right direction, especially when the Kurdish party politically won some really great seats in Kurdish parliament, in Turkish parliament. So you've got both of these things going. At the same time, when the Turkish government is fighting the PKK, they have great relationship with the Kurds of Iraq. So it's a very Byzantine world we live in. Yes, sir.
Can you describe your concept of the Confederation a little bit more in the sense of autonomous regions?
Well, I think some examples would be Confederation or federal system, UAE. UAE is an example of it. There are 7 emirates come together, but they're all autonomous. They have their own economy, but they have one central government. Canada is a federal system. And Iraqi constitution has allowed that, but that needs to be strengthened, that needs to be modified. The one thing, by the way, is that as we advocate all these things happening, we have to have a plan B. We really do. And I didn't mention that. And plan B, if it doesn't work, and it may not work, it may not be a choice, but both Syria and Iraq could be divided. Could become a number of different states. The other plan B is if the Iran deal does not really work as we have to have and that's why it's become so important for Israel to have the deal with the Palestinians, so there is a real commonality with Israel and the Sunni Arab countries, if it doesn't work. But I don't think that would be the case.
Regarding the Plan B, if memory serves, Vice President Biden, early in the first Obama administration, put forward a partition plan for Iraq to divide the country into 3 states, semi-independent states. Would you speculate on the possibility of success of such a plan? That's
an issue of argument going on constantly when I am in that part of the world. The difficulty right now, the Kurds of Iraq want that to happen because they really have feeling so disconnected with the central government of Baghdad. The difficulty of an independent Kurdish state today will immediately have very strong opposition from Iran and Turkey. So I think the current thinking, the current administration, is we really can't afford, in the middle of this chaos, to add one more level of partition. And the Kurds themselves actually tell you that. They're pragmatic. This is not the time. This is the time to get the security in place and over time have good relationships with our neighbors. And that's what's happening. Interestingly enough, many in the Arab countries have given the Kurds a lot of support, the Kurds of Iraq especially, and the Syria. Jordan has, Saudi Arabia has, and the Emirates have. But the 2 powerhouses, the 2 big countries of Iran and Turkey with a large Kurdish population are weary about if Iraq becomes an independent Kurdish state or a part of it, the Kurds and PKK in Turkey will demand the same. So it's complex, and I think the Kurds need to be patient. At some point, that they may get their independence. But they realize this is not the time. Yes, ma'am.
What exactly has triggered the massive refugee happening right now? I mean, I'm assuming refugees have been escaping and going off to other countries for a while, but right now, why is it so big and so much in the news?
The massive movement of refugees is complete breakdown of society. No security, complete chaos, no money, no food. And the initial wave of refugees were poor individuals. Now you have the middle class, teachers, doctors, engineers with their families. It really is. It's a fallen, disintegrated society. And they want a special, the region are very much, especially the society, that is whole society there, family is extremely important, especially children and education of children. And they're all wanting to go and take care of their children in schools, better life, free, have some dignity and respect in the countries where that's happening, in Syria and Iraq. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think there's maybe a hope of eventually getting these refugees that are spread all over, getting them reestablished in their countries of origin once things get maybe settled down there?
Well, the sheer numbers are so large that it's very difficult to get them all back in. I mean, we're talking about the 12 million. The odds of the refugees who are in the neighboring countries to go back are much higher than those that are going far away, just simply because they're in the border. But we have to solve the chaos and disintegration of society and get them back in. The sooner the better. Unfortunately, we're fighting two battles at once: broken governments and extremist rise of ISIS or Daesh. Yes, Hal?
You mentioned that you had optimism that with collaboration that ISIS could be defeated. Can you expand a little further on what maybe moving parts would be to help?
Well, they can. I mean, I think the one thing, first of all, I would immediately arm the Kurds of Iraq and Syria, immediately, and make it clear to Turkey and others that that's going to happen, because there are boots on the ground and they're succeeding. Immediately expand the role of Jordan, that has been the most effective in training the Free Syrian Army to be the boots on the ground. And make it clear to Turkey that they are involved now, and that we're using Incirlik as the air base. We want their involvement. We want them to train the FSA on their end, but not at the expense of the Kurds. That's the boots on the ground. You do that, we do that. Over time, we can defeat them. Well, at the same time, we're moving very strongly onto the economic front and very strongly on the political front. You know, at some point in the future, it's not inconceivable that that region could become a free trading economic zone, especially if you had all of those issues are in play. And if you have Israel as part of that group with their technology and their economic prowess, and you have Saudi Arabia with all their still incredible wealth, and you have Iran, and you have Turkey, and you have Syria. But that is going to be generations from now. So we have to think of this thing not in terms of fix right away. We're looking 10, 15, 20 years. Yes, sir.
Well, first, thank you very much. I certainly agree with your analysis completely, but when you made your comment about option B, it hit the thought that I had throughout your comments, but it wasn't just option B, it was also the danger of half measures. For example, I agree that the invasion of Iraq is the greatest foreign policy disaster in U.S. history, but if you're going to go in, don't go in halfway, which is what the U.S. did. Half the number of troops that was originally asked for. Syria, you got to do something. You do half of what's done. And I feel like there is an admonition here to either do it right or don't do it. It's not a time for half measures in the Middle East today. Would you agree with that?
You are absolutely correct. The world looked to us for leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, whether we like it or not, we're the leader. And we have to exercise leadership wisely. We just don't go in there, the military, and this doesn't work. With our diplomacy, with our economy, with our values, and we also have the military power. We are the ones. We cannot abdicate that responsibility. Yes, ma'am.
So how would you apply that to Israel and Palestine?
Well, I mean, we really have to work with Israel, and we have to convince Israel to really come to the table with the Palestinian two-state solution. In fact, if we talk about leadership today, if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has probably the greatest opportunity to be a game changer, because he's a hardliner, just like Nixon going to China, and really move forward to a two-state solution. That will become his legacy. And that will be good for Israel, good for the Palestinians, and absolutely good for the Middle East.
Do you believe there's enough energy in Israel or with the leaders of Israel to do that at this point?
I really don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's so much change going on in Israel, just like every other places. There's a lot of tensions happening. And just like what's going on in the American Jewish community, there's, of course, a strong sentiment towards Israel and the whole country of Israel. But where is it going? Where is it going to be true with the traditional liberal tradition of what the country was founded about? So it's a tough call. And of course, there's a lot of concern about their existentialism. They're a small country. They think they're surrounded by enemies. But they're a very powerful country. There really is no country in the Middle East can stand up against them. The alternative, if they open up to the rest of the Middle East, will enhance them even better and even greater. Okay, thank you all very, very much. I appreciate you.
So